Hi guys, in today's video, I'm going to be continuing with the AP Calculus BCE syllabus. I'm going to be discussing the extreme value theorem. So the extreme value states that I'm going to write it out. If f of x is continuous, if f of x is continuous on a closed interval a comma b, then f of x has both a maximum and a minimum on the interval. So if f of x is continuous on a closed interval, then f of x has both a maximum and a minimum on that interval. So let's look at when this, so when, so when can't this be applied? Firstly, when there's an open interval, as we know that it says it has to be continuous on a closed interval. So let me give you an example. So what if we have a graph like this? Then this is not a closed interval, right? As there's a gap, so it's an open interval. Secondly, when it's not continuous. So if you have a graph like this, goes something like this and this. And our interval is the entire graph. It's not continuous, right? Because there are jumps. So one thing you have to know about EVT or extreme value theorem is that sometimes the minimum and maximum value are the same. For example, if it's a horizontal line, the minimum and maximum value are the same. Now let me discuss what is a maximum extrema. So you have to use all this knowledge to solve problems. I'll discuss more questions on these in the next class. So maximum extrema. So let me draw a graph so that you guys can understand. So this is our graph. This is C and this is f of C. So this graph is f of x. And this is our interval, I. So f of C is maximum as it's the highest value of f of C, as it is maximum of f on the interval when f of C is the maximum of f on the interval when f of C is greater than equal to f of x. For all x, so for all the x value, for all the x values in our interval. So as we can see, f of C right here, this point, it is the maximum, right? Because f of C is greater than equal to f of x. So can you see any y value which is higher than this? No, right? So this is the maximum extrema. Now let's look at minimum extrema. So let's say we have a graph like this. This is C. This is f of C. And this is our interval. So f of C is a minimum It's the minimum, right? F of C is the minimum of F on the interval I when. So it's a minimum. It's the minimum extrema when F of C is less than equal to F of X for all X. So for all X values in the interval. So F of C is the minimum of F on the interval when F of C is less than equal to F of X for all X in that interval. We can see that right here in this graph, F of C, there is no other value of F of X which is less than this, right? So yes, this is our minimum extreme. So now the final topic I want to talk about today is relative versus absolute. So relative versus absolute maximums or minimum. So a relative maximum or minimum is it is the maximum or minimum relative to the part of graph beside it. And absolute is when it's like, so this is relative. I'm just going to write it as R. And absolute is when it's the maximum or minimum of the entire graph, like compared to anything else in the graph, that is the highest point. So a relative minimum would mean that it is smaller compared to the things around. So let me give you an example. So if we have a graph like this, if you have a graph like this, you can see that this point right here is our relative max, right? Because it's not the highest point on a graph, as this is the highest point, but it is higher compared to the things around it. So on the left and on the right here, you can see that this is the highest point. So this is our relative max, and this is our absolute max. So max is short for maximum. This is our absolute minimum. But if you see, this is also a relative minimum, right? This is also a relative minimum as the things to the left or right are still smaller, right? So it's an absolute and relative minimum. And this would be an example of a relative. So these are what relative and absolute maximums and minimums are. Okay, that's it for today's video, guys. In today's video, I discussed the extreme value theorem, maximum extrema, minimum extrema, and relative versus absolute maximums and minimums. If you have any questions on these topics, please let me know in the comment section below so that I can solve it. Thank you.